The film which you are about to see is the account of the horrific accident which befell a woman in Utah. Originally from a small town right outside of Denver, 40-year-old Danelle Ballengee was once considered in 2003 Sports Illustrated world's premier female endurance athlete. She competed in multiple multi-day international triathlons as well as participated in climbing all 55 of Colorado's 14,000-foot peak, something that she was able to accomplish in just a 14-day period, which set the speed record which still stands to this very day. These days she's toned down the extremeness of her workouts, though she does still find the time to participate in the occasional nearby triathlon, snowshoe race, or eco challenge whenever she finds the time. Especially now as she finds herself in the small desert town of Moab, Utah. This is one of the more iconic American deserts with its beautiful stone arches, red rocks, and mesmerizing canyons, along with an amazing array of desert animals such as kangaroo rats, mule deers, desert cottontails, black bears, desert bighorn sheep, and mountain lions. So although this environment is an endurance athlete's perfect dream, it can also be an incredibly dangerous and even deadly environment. Which unfortunately brings us back to our story. On the fateful day of December 13th, 2006, Danelle, along with her dog Taz, decided to drive out to the nearby desert canyon for a 2-hour run. She left her house about 11 a.m. and began her run at about noon. About halfway into it though, she found herself running on what was called a slick rock shelf, which are usually pretty dangerous on their own. Today, the shelf had actually a slick layer of ice running along it, and as Danelle and Taz were running alongside of it, not thinking about the dangers that could happen, well, that's when the absolute worst case scenario actually happened. As she took another step, before she even realized what was happening, she slipped and fell on her butt and simultaneously began sliding an incredible 60 feet to the ground below. Her life flashing before her eyes, she knew something horrible was about to happen, especially as around the 20-foot mark, she went from sliding on her butt to free-falling the rest of the way down, to actually landing directly on her feet, but then immediately falling down to the ground. By the time it was over, she was still conscious, but she knew something was wrong. But due to the massive amounts of adrenaline pumping through her body, she felt no pain. That didn't last long though, as a few minutes later, as she was trying to stand back up, she tried to walk a little and immediately fell back down to the ground, as it was apparent that her legs were now useless and broken. But in reality, it was much worse. She managed to shatter her pelvis and break it into 4 different pieces. Though still working on pure adrenaline, Danelle knew that she couldn't just lay there and wait for help. That honestly was never going to come anyway. And with nighttime right around the corner, she knew that she had to start making her way towards her car, and at this point, without any hesitation, she began to drag herself along the floor, which unfortunately was not fast at all. Taz then instinctively ran around the cliff and down to Danelle, who was then proceeding to drag herself to safety, which unfortunately was still almost a world away for Danelle, who could only move the top half of her body. 5 hours has now passed and it's now 5 p.m. The sun is beginning to go down and the cold wind is now beginning to take over the desert night air. Danelle, now almost on the verge of passing out from dehydration and starvation, finds a small ledge to drag herself to that happens to have a small puddle of water. With the desert air being close to freezing though, she made sure not to drink too much on the probable chance that she might end up peeing herself later and suffer from hypothermia. Especially as the temperatures were now dropping down to about 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and Danelle was only wearing lightweight running clothes as she thought she would be home by now. But even more nightmarish to think about, she knew that she couldn't fall asleep either, as she knew that she would certainly die if she did so. So in order to stay alive and warm, she gathered all the strength in her body and did small crunches every 3 to 5 seconds in order to keep the blood flowing and her body warm, at least on the inside. And she would have to do this for the rest of the night. The next morning, as the sun began to rise, Danelle knew that she had to keep moving, keep dragging herself closer to her car, closer to salvation. There was only one problem though. After hours of working out in the cold with a broken pelvis, she couldn't move a single inch. Each movement she tried sent her into excruciating pain. It was to the point that all she could do was scream in pain for help and take a second after each scream to listen for anyone to scream back. Though the longer she did this, the more and more sunlight was slowly fading away. until eventually it was too late and the sunlight was completely gone, and worse yet, she now had to go another 24 hours without sleep if she wished to survive the night. Luckily, by this time though, she regained a little movement in her upper body and was able to continue doing small crunches to stay warm, all the while thinking of her friends and family. In all reality though, things were way worse than they already appeared. Danelle had been bleeding internally by this time and had already lost over a third of her blood. As the sun came up on the third day, Danelle was beginning to be optimistic again and thought she might be able to move again and maybe even continue dragging herself closer towards her car. Unfortunately though, just like the day before, she was completely incapable of moving even an inch to drag herself back. As a last-ditch effort, she then began to get desperate and asked her dog Taz to go get help. Then as they both locked eyes, Taz turned around and started sprinting down the canyon, all the while all she could do was hope and pray that he understood her. It's now midday, still on the third day, and Danelle is starting to slip in and out of consciousness. And not sure if Taz would even come back with help at all, she began to slump into an even worse depression, thinking about family and how she wanted more than anything to have family of her own and how that was most likely never going to happen now. About an hour later, Taz would return, but he was all alone, and worse yet, he walked right up to Danelle and started drinking from the same water source that she had, which was her only water source, which sadly now made her feel immediately that she was now surely going to die. But just then, almost as if she heard the heavenly trumpets themselves, she heard the engine of a car that was driving nearby and thought to herself, I have to keep fighting, I can't give up. The only thing that she was worried about at this point was that she had already lost so much blood that she was going delirious and only hearing wind that sounded like an engine. But just then, she heard the engine getting closer and closer until eventually it just stopped near her body. So almost instinctively, she began to call back out for help, and almost immediately she heard a voice call back out and say, I'm here for you. Then as she was crying from the joy, the man told her, you know, you have one good dog there. As it turned out that not only did Taz find help for his injured owner, but he managed to run the 5 miles back to where searchers had found Danelle's truck, and even managed to lead rescuers back to Danelle herself, which is why when he returned he seemed so relaxed and okay, and didn't mind drinking from Danelle's only water source. Danelle would later spend about 3 weeks in the hospital and then another 3 months in a wheelchair. Then about 15 months later, Danelle and Taz, like true warriors, returned back to that canyon and were finally able to finish their run without any issue. Danelle now considers herself one of the luckiest women in the world, as not only was she lucky to have an amazing dog like Taz to save her life, if it weren't for him getting help when he did, Danelle would have surely have died, as not only would she have had to stay up for another 24 hours without sleep, she would have had to do so covered in inches of fresh new snow cover. As that very night of the rescue, a blizzard had hit the canyon itself. Though with that being said, Danelle Ballengee truly is one of the luckiest and most fierce women in the world. Once again, thank you for watching the video. Remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons and turn on the notification bell for more content in the future. Goodbye for now.